To clarify the title, this story is not canon, but rather set in the canon timeline of Star Wars. The title is already incredibly long, so I just wanted to warn everyone so they understand what they're getting into. Fire. All I see is fire and darkness. All I feel is hate, sorrow, and the searing pain of a lightsaber wound. The forests are ablaze, the smoke is thick, and the air is heavy. I don't know where I'm going. I want to stop, but I can't. The fire is spreading, the hatred building, the enemy pursuing. Morgan, are you paying attention? Slowly opening my eyes, I'm greeted by the kind yet stern face of Master Skywalker. I'm sorry, Master, I must have lost myself for a moment. What was your question? Turning his attention away from me, Master Skywalker made a motion to the other students. And there, my pupils, is one of the greatest dangers of being a Force sensitive, getting easily distracted. The handful of other students laughed. I'd have felt embarrassed if I wasn't still out of it and getting a grip on my surroundings. The breeze was soft, but strong enough for the trees to sway back and forth slowly. Master Skywalker stood in the middle of a grove, surrounded by his students and the indigenous life of the planet. The trees, the animals, the plants, and even the worms that dug through the dirt beneath our very feet. We were several miles away from the temple. The walk here was always a trek, but worth it. This place had a serenity, a calm, that I never felt back home on Salon. In the distance I can hear, no, that's not right, feel, the heartbeat of a newly born Wilshrew, a small woodland creature that when fully grown is no larger than a human foot. The baby is smaller than my hand, and its heart as large as my thumbnail. It's a delicate thing, fragile, weak, and needing protection, but one day it will be strong enough to survive on its own. Concentrate, go deeper. The soft but harsh voice of a woman broke my concentration. Listen. Go further. Push past these surface feelings. Time felt as if it was moving slower. I could hear Master Skywalker trying to get my attention, but I wasn't listening. My body was there with the rest of the students, but my mind, my spirit, was somewhere else. I was able to find the distinctive thumping of the baby Wilshrew. It was constant and steady, but do you feel it? The old woman's voice echoed in my mind. What was I trying to feel? What was I missing? The beating of the heart. I focused on it and cleared my mind, pushing past the joy I felt. The beating became even louder, more frantic, chaotic. The baby didn't understand what was going on. It didn't understand where it was. It was afraid. You can feel it. Joy. I felt joy at the prospect of this creature being born, but it was afraid. I don't know if I understand, if I truly understand the lesson this voice was trying to teach me. Katarn! Morgan, are you with us? Once again, I slowly opened my eyes and was greeted by the more stern, less kind face of Master Skywalker. I am, Master. Raising his hand to stroke his beard, Master Skywalker smirked. Well then, if that's the case, then perhaps you can answer the question. He knew I wasn't paying attention, but the smirk that was still on his face suggested I answered it without saying a word. He knew what I was doing. Morgan still seems to be a bit lost. Ben, how would you describe the Force? Adjusting himself on a stone similar to the ones we all used as seats, Ben prepared himself to speak. The Force is like fire, raw, wild, but can be controlled if treated with respect. Ben seemed satisfied with himself. That grin he wore got grating quick. Everything came easy to him, while I had to fight, work, and claw just to keep up with everyone else. The forest was still ablaze, but the smoke had thinned. For a few brief moments, I had hope that I could get away, but it turned to ashes in my mouth. There was a cliff, a steep one. If I jumped, I'd probably die, but if I stayed, I'd certainly die. The pain from my stabbing was unbearable. My stomach felt like it was falling apart, and my legs were on the verge of giving out. Behind me, I could hear the rushing of water. A stream, perhaps? Maybe a waterfall. In front of me, I could feel the unbearable heat and see 7 figures shrouded in smoke approaching. You know what you have to do. The familiar voice of the old woman was guiding me. What about you, Morgan? How would you describe the Force? Master Skywalker seemed satisfied with Ben's answer, but something was off. Something had begun to bother him. I know what it feels like, but it's hard to explain. The other students had begun to laugh. One of them mocked, "He can barely lift a rock. How would he know what it feels like?" Master Skywalker sharply snapped back, "Enough," before returning to me. "The Force isn't easy to explain. Just try. To me, the Force is like water, a river." With no alternatives, I took 2 steps back until both of my heels were at the edge of the cliff. Letting go of all my fears, doubts, and hopes, I jumped, becoming, for a brief moment, truly one with the Force. Like water, it's essential for life, but if someone isn't careful, it can kill them. The pain from my wound was too much. As I made contact with the stream down below, I lost consciousness. Oftentimes, large bodies of water and other rivers will converge into one another. Not only are they connected, but if someone travels down one of these paths, they won't always know where it's going to take them. It wasn't a stream. Too deep for that. It was a river. I trusted in the Force. No, not just the Force, but the voice. And it was leading me away from danger. Even if all the water on a planet or a galaxy is confined, it's still able to move, to be free when it rains. It can never truly be controlled or suppressed. As I finally came to, I was flat on my back at the end of the river with the sun overhead beating down on me. I was alive, but everyone else was either dead or worse. So much worse. The slightest ripple can echo endlessly in an ocean, in a galaxy. Picking myself up, I could still see the smoke of the Jedi Temple in the distance. I was alive. That had to mean something. The Force flows through all of us, and all of us flow through the Force. I don't know what to do from here. Everything and everyone is gone. All I can do is keep moving forward. The other students were silent, their vacant faces staring back at me. Whatever was bothering Master Skywalker must have passed. He seemed relieved, or at least hopeful. Who knew Kyle's son had a way with words? You must have gotten that from Jan. For a moment, Master Skywalker smiled to himself, reminiscing on the past. The Force, despite all that we know about it, is something that we can never objectively understand. As we've just seen, when asked to describe the Force, both Ben and Morgan gave 2 very different interpretations. Opposites, in fact, fire and water. The light side and the dark side do exist. Good and evil exist, but they unto themselves are rarely objective absolutes. Master Skywalker paused for a moment and scanned his students. Each of us were hanging on his every word. Some of us did this to take in his lesson, others to question and find flaws in what he was saying. But all I could do was think back to the baby Wilshrew, afraid to be alive. My father was Anakin Skywalker, a hero to the Republic before he became Darth Vader. He was a troubled man who committed great evil throughout his life, but he also did a lot of good. For every life he took as Darth Vader, he saved one as Anakin Skywalker. And in the end, he gave his life to protect another, to protect me. Was he a good man or an evil man? Both answers could be correct, though I suspect the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Master Skywalker turned to me and pointed. Morgan's father is Kyle Katarn, a hero of the rebellion, one of the first of a new breed of Jedi, and one of the first to fall to the temptations of the dark side. He stood against a fallen Jedi Master and protected a sacred place known as the Valley of the Jedi. I used to hear stories when I was little about what my dad did during the war. He never talked about it. Kyle used powers considered to be dark, but never fell to temptation during his quest against the fallen master. Over the years, he fell in love with a long-term comrade and friend, something that the old Jedi Order would have never allowed. However, as I said before, Kyle did eventually fall to the dark side. My dad used to keep a few items buried by a tree in our yard. When I left to train with Master Skywalker, he stood next to that tree while waving goodbye. He remembers what he did and is afraid to repeat it. While on an ancient world that used to belong to the Sith, he gave into the temptation of the dark side, but his comrade, friend, and wife, Jan, was able to bring him back. Kyle used the dark side for great good, and despite falling, never harmed anyone. Does that make the dark side good? No. If Kyle was a weaker man, he may have done something he would regret, but that doesn't mean the dark side is inherently evil. Master Skywalker let a silence take over the grove. Each of us were lost in thought. There was a lesson here, and I think I understood. But the will shrew, I couldn't get that out of my mind. The old Jedi Order was dogmatic. 1,000 years of peace made Jedi challenging the beliefs of the Order difficult. The Force is a difficult thing to understand. Though you should listen to the teachings of the past, you should also not be afraid to question them. For, as we've seen here today, there can be many interpretations. With the lesson over, the other students got up and began the walk back to the temple. However, I stayed where I was, listening to the heart of the baby Wilshrew. "You don't agree," the voice of the old woman returned. Though I understand his lesson and what he was trying to teach, the fear of the baby Wilshrew, contrasted with the joy I felt with its birth, was still echoing in my mind. Master Skywalker treated the Force as if it was two separate entities, at least for this lesson, but I don't think that's right. As living beings, the prospect of being alive brings most people joy, or at the very least, people aren't afraid to be alive. With death, some people are apathetic, but most are afraid. And yet, the moment the Wilshrew was born, it was afraid of being alive. It's something I can't make sense of yet. Then you've begun to walk a path few have tread. Having no choice but to return to the temple, I began my pained journey back. It was the one place I didn't want to see, but it was the only place I could go. Looking up, I was greeted with the sight of 7 small craft beginning their ascent to space. A chill of fear and dread ran through my spine as my legs gave out from under me. My head was heavy and my body was weak. No matter how hard I pushed myself, I could not get up. I knew they were going after my parents, but there wasn't a damn thing I could do to stop them. Using my one good arm, I reached out in front of me and attempted to drag myself forward. All I achieved was breaking my own fingers. I did it again with my other arm. The result was the same. My heart was beating rapidly. The wound, the jump, the pain, the fear, all of it was wreaking havoc on my body. I wanted to die, to end all of this suffering. All that awaited me if I made it out of this was sorrow and loss. The other students were dead. Master Skywalker was dead, and my parents were going to be killed. The idea of living through all of that, dealing with all of that, was more terrifying than dying here alone. As the blood poured out of my fingers, my vision began to fade. Before my eyes, I could see the moments that brought me joy, happiness, learning to shoot with my dad, doing flight sims with my mom, and even meditating with Master Skywalker. "Are you afraid?" The voice of the old woman returned, but this time it felt closer. "Yes," I said out loud. "Of what? Death or life?" Her tone was calm and constant. "Life. I don't know if I can go on after losing so much." "Then you aren't afraid of life." The woman's voice was closer, as if she was next to me. "You're still afraid of death, the death of friends, of loved ones, of yourself. You're afraid of being an empty husk." As my vision finally gave out, my hearing followed suit. All I could feel was the constant pain and the beating of my heart. "If you're truly afraid of life, then stay where you are and let yourself fade." Once again, her voice echoed in my mind. "But if you aren't, raise your hand." As if by instinct, I slowly began to raise my hand. "Are you sure?" Her question wasn't kind, but matter-of-fact. With all of these thoughts and feelings, I simply didn't know. With my right hand raised high, I could feel someone reach out and grasp it. The hands were cold, metallic. "You do know. You just don't know how." As those words echoed through my mind, I could feel another hand on my wound. Slowly, the pain faded and my senses returned. As I opened my eyes, an old woman with a cold face was standing above me, her eyes obstructed with a hood. and the sun replaced with the moon. The night was colder than normal. It felt like early fall, but it was still summer. What was really strange was the fact I was no longer near the riverbank, but rather on a mat near a hut in the middle of the forest. My strength hadn't fully returned, but I was able to stand. At first, I thought the old woman was a hallucination, but she was real, and strangely enough, blind. "Who are you?" I asked with pained breath. "A teacher. Your teacher."